This story happened in 1998 in a small town in Indiana, and although it sounds like an urban legend, it was in the local papers at the time. I worked at the theater back then, and I can tell you, parts of it were very real. The Riverview Theater was old, one of those single-screen places that had been around since the 50s. By the late 1990s, it was more nostalgia than business, but people still came in for cheap tickets and the buttery popcorn. We had 3 employees most nights, one at the ticket booth, one at concessions, and me running the projector. That Friday night, a woman came in alone for the late showing of a thriller that had just opened. She was in her mid-30s, dressed casually, carried a large purse. Nothing unusual. What was unusual was that she was one of only 2 people who bought tickets for that screening. The other was a man who came in 10 minutes later. He was tall, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. Didn't buy popcorn, didn't speak much. Just slid his cash across the counter, got his ticket, and went inside. The cashier said he barely looked up at her. When the movie started, I settled in upstairs, keeping an eye on the reels. At first, nothing seemed strange, but about 20 minutes in, the woman left her seat and went to concessions to complain. She whispered to the cashier that the man in the back row wasn't watching the movie. He was just staring at her. The cashier assured her it was fine, probably nothing, but offered to let her sit closer to the front. She agreed. From the booth, I could see her move a few rows forward. The man shifted too, leaving his seat and taking one a couple of rows behind her. He never looked at the screen. By the halfway point, she came upstairs to me, something patrons almost never did. She was pale, shaking. She said she felt like he was waiting for something, that he hadn't taken his eyes off her since the lights dimmed. I offered to stop the film, to call the police, but she insisted she didn't want to make a scene. "Maybe I'm overreacting," she said, before going back down. 10 minutes later, she was gone. Not from the theater, just from her seat. The man was gone too. We paused the movie and brought the lights up, confusing the handful of people in the audience. We searched the aisles, the lobby, the restrooms. Nothing. The back exit door was locked from the inside, as usual. The only way out should have been past the lobby, and no one saw them leave. We called the police. They arrived, did a sweep, took statements. At first, they assumed the woman just left with the man willingly, until they checked the security tapes. On the lobby camera, you can clearly see the woman enter, buy her ticket, and walk into the auditorium. You can see the man follow minutes later. But there's no footage of either of them leaving, not through the front, not through the sides. The only exit door in the back stayed shut the whole time. The police pulled the film itself for evidence. When they ran it through, frame by frame, something made them stop cold. In the wide shots of the audience, when the light from the screen hit just right, you could make out the silhouettes of the viewers. The woman's shape clear in the middle rows, but the back row, empty. No outline where the man should have been. The case never went anywhere. The woman was never reported missing, at least not in our county. The man was never identified. Some people said it was a stalker she already knew, that she slipped out with him through some hidden way. But others, including me, remember how pale she looked, how scared, and how in that old theater, with its shadows and dead ends, you could swear there were places a person could disappear into. The Riverview shut down a few years later. The building still stands, boarded up and silent. Teenagers break in sometimes, posting videos online. But the strangest part is more than once, in those clips, you can see the auditorium, empty seats, dust everywhere. And if you pause at the right moment, just before the flashlight pans away, there's a figure, tall, sitting alone in the back row, watching. This story comes from my uncle, who worked as a projectionist in the late 1970s at a small independent cinema in Pennsylvania. He told it to me once, after a few beers, and swore every word was true. The Orpheum Theater was already old back then. A single screen with faded velvet curtains and a projection booth that rattled whenever a train passed through town. Most of the reels were rented through distributors, labeled, logged, carefully stored in metal canisters. Except for one. It showed up one Monday morning, tucked at the bottom of a delivery crate. The canister wasn't labeled with a title, just a piece of tape with number 7 scrawled on it. The manager, a heavy smoker named Briggs, shrugged it off. "Probably a short," he said. "We'll check it later." They stuck it on a shelf and forgot about it. A few weeks later, during a slow Thursday, Briggs got curious. He told my uncle to load it up after the matinee when the place was empty. My uncle threaded the reel, killed the house lights, and started the projector. The footage began like a newsreel. Grainy shots of streets, cars, pedestrians from the 1950s. But then the images shifted. The camera was inside a theater, their theater, the Orpheum. You could see the screen, the curtains, even the torn carpet in the aisle. Then came shots of the audience, rows of seats filled with blurry figures. The camera panned slowly across them. Some turned toward the lens, others sat perfectly still. Their faces were pale, expressionless. My uncle said it felt like they were waiting. At first, Briggs laughed. "Some art school crap," he muttered. But then the camera angle changed. It was the same theater, same seats, but this time the audience wasn't strangers. It was them. Briggs, my uncle, the concession girl, even the janitor, all sitting silently in the seats, staring blankly at the screen. The problem was, none of them had posed for it, yet there they were. My uncle swore the reel showed him exactly as he was dressed that night. Same shirt, same tie, same watch on his wrist. Briggs got pale. He told my uncle to shut it off. But the reel kept running. Even after the end leader slapped through the projector, the images didn't stop. The film kept looping more footage, new shots of the auditorium, closer angles of the audience. And every time, there were fewer people on screen. One row would be empty, then another, until finally, the only figure left was a single person sitting dead center. Neither of them could see his face. The camera never got close enough. But my uncle said the shape was wrong. Too tall, limbs too long, hunched forward as if waiting to rise. Briggs ripped the reel out of the projector, melted a chunk of it on the bulb. He stuffed the canister in the trash, told everyone it was junk film, not to mention it again. That night, though, when my uncle closed up, he swore he heard the projector running upstairs. He went to the booth, but it was dark, empty, just the faint smell of burnt celluloid. Over the next month, strange things happened. Patrons complained of the film skipping and flashing a single frame of something that wasn't part of the movie. Always the same thing. The interior of the Orpheum, an empty row of seats. Employees started quitting. Briggs drank more, chain smoked until his hand shook. One night, he locked himself in the booth alone and ran the projector until dawn. When they opened the door, the reel on the machine wasn't one of theirs. It was number 7 again, sitting in the take-up reel like it had always been there. A week later, Briggs didn't show up. Police said he'd gone missing. His car was found parked behind the theater. The only clue was a Polaroid taped to the steering wheel. It showed the Orpheum's auditorium, every seat empty but one. In the center row, Briggs sat slumped forward, staring at the screen. The Orpheum closed a few years later, boarded up. Locals say it's haunted. Teenagers break in and claim that if you shine a light at the screen, you'll see rows of pale figures sitting silently in the dark. And if you stay long enough, one by one, the figures fade away, until the only shape left is a tall, hunched man in the center, waiting.
This one came from a night guard I met while doing temp work in Illinois in the early 2000s. He was an older guy, ex-cop, not the type to scare easy. He told me this while we sat in the break room at 3 a.m., both of us wired on bad coffee. He swore it was the reason he never worked theaters again. The Majestic Multiplex was a newer build, all neon lights and 10 auditoriums stacked in a confusing maze of hallways. Most of the theaters had plain walls behind the screens, but Auditorium 6 was different. It had a small door tucked low in the corner, right where the screen met the wall. Supposedly, it led to a storage closet used for cables and old reels. During construction, one of the workers had joked that it was like a portal, an exit for the monsters behind the movie. Nobody thought much of it. But once the place opened, employees began whispering about Auditorium 6. The guard, let's call him Frank, first noticed something on a Tuesday night. The last show had ended, lobby cleared, all theaters empty. He was doing his rounds when he heard faint noise from 6. Not the usual hum of equipment. This was whispering. Low voices, dozens of them, layered over one another. He opened the door and stepped in. The auditorium was dark, the screen blank, but the whispering seemed to come from behind it. He crept up the aisle with his flashlight. The sound grew sharper, like words just out of reach. At the bottom, he shone his light at the corner. The little door was ajar. Now this was strange, because the storage closets were always locked. He pulled it open. Inside was a narrow space barely big enough for a person to crouch in. Coiled cables, a broken reel canister, dust everywhere. He swore he smelled cigarettes and something else, like sweat. And scattered on the floor were ticket stubs. Not old ones either. Fresh, with yesterday's date printed on them. He backed out, shut the door, and told himself it was just a prank, maybe kids messing around. But it kept happening.
Night after night, he'd find the little door cracked open. Sometimes inside, more stubs, or candy wrappers, or an empty soda cup, all with receipts from that same day. He asked the staff, but no one admitted to using the space. The projectionists didn't even have keys to that closet, so who was going in? One Friday, Frank decided to wait. The last show ended at midnight. He did his sweep, then sat 3 rows from the back, watching the screen glow faintly with emergency light. Hours passed. At 2 a.m., he heard it, the creak of the little door. He froze. A shadow moved behind the screen. Something shifted in that narrow space, brushing against the fabric. For a moment, he swore he saw the outline of a head pressing from the other side, listening to the auditorium. His flashlight flicked on by reflex. The shape vanished. He ran down, yanked the door open. Empty. Except this time, there wasn't just trash. There was a Polaroid photo wedged against the wall. It showed Auditorium 6, taken from behind the screen. Every seat was filled with people, their faces blurred from the flash. Except for one seat in the back row, his seat, empty. He turned in his resignation the next morning. The Majestic is still open today. Auditorium 6 is in rotation like any other, though employees avoid it when they can. Some late-night staff claim they hear movement during films, like someone crawling inside the walls. And a few unlucky guests swear they've seen eyes shining faintly from behind the screen just before the credits roll.